what we call in the Mvskoke language, you call it Cvkotakse Hayv, and that means bow maker. Just right down here, I've seen some boat art. There's some up in here on this little edge of this field. In here, this is all boat art. What we're going to do is try to locate the boat art. But that's what it's about, and that's what we're here for. I'll tell you what, there's nothing like this tree. We call it in our language Idolani, and that means yellowwood. That's a yellowwood. And you look for your trees, you learn how to read trees, learn how to study trees. And there's a lot of this that sort of blends together, and there's a harmony to it, and there's a balance to it. Look for the length and the height that it's growing, and then I'll concentrate on the bark of it to see if it's twisted. And that's what you don't want, is twisted bark, because that's what's underneath the bark. The grain is going to be the same way. We got a kind of boat art that has what I call snaky grain in it. It just takes a little more time, and that's where your skill comes in. That tree has got a lot of little bitty knots on it, and I love that. It's got that character to it. And today, a lot of people look at the aesthetics of everything they look at, and they think it's got to be perfect. Not so. You can find one that's got the little bitty knots in it. They've got all the character in it, and it'll make as good a shooting bow as one that's straight grain that's pretty. It don't necessarily have to be a outstanding looking bow to be able to shoot well. The tree looks like it's trying to die because the bark on it's starting to come loose. That don't mean that wood in there is not good for bows. That limb right there has got a little arc in it. And if you can visualize in your mind, that bow looks like it's backwards because that's the way it grew. But after that bow is made, and being everything comes into play, where everything falls in place, that bow will probably be stronger than what I call average. It'll be above average for cast and snap, because that bow is wanting to bend back the way it grew. You get a gut feeling about If you have to think about it too long, don't cut it. What would be the best? Okay, see that bow in it there, where the tree grew, leaning? That's got what they call a backward, it's called a deflex in the tree. We want to split it this way. See the crack in it right there? It's going all the way down to the other side of it. That's what you want. A lot of your old time creeks used to say we are like trees. There's a back to a bow, upper limb, lower limb, belly and a back. It's like a human being. Mm-hmm. You have to be careful sometimes about how you walk through life. What is your path? What is your conduct in life? And there's a relationship spiritually to all of this. All of this is connected. Not only the bow making, but the arrows also. Dip it? Yeah. Okay. Dip it in there. Down south, so probably put it on that side of the truck here for a windbreak. May have to crank her up there pretty good where I'll take a hold. Okay, that's what you wanted at that point of smoking. And when that piece of boat art goes in there, it'll sizzle like it's cooking. And that's paraffin wax, and this is what it is right here. It's canning wax is all it is.
Golf wax.
And that's what I use. That's what I prefer to use because it seals and it goes into the wood. And you want to get that as deep, and I'll touch the bottom of that with that piece of boat arc there. But I'm saying in the older days, probably our people use bear's grease, possibly any kind of fat will work. They might even use a little bit of, I wouldn't say they'd use hickory oil, but that was pretty scarce for them to make, a lot of work making that. But any kind of fat will work if you don't have something like this to do that with, and beeswax will work. Mm-hmm. But here's what I'm going to do is see that? And that's hot. Don't let it get on you. And that's going to coat that, and it'll go up into the end of that, where, if you can see that, where it'll keep that from checking. And you'll have less loss by doing that. You can take green boat art after it's been cut and split, and take off your bark and your sapwood, and that will speed up the curing time like less than a year possibly. Mm-hmm. This white wood, it's almost in a very, very distinct straight line all the way down where it meets the heartwood, all the way in to where the knot is. And ideally, that's what you really look for to make a real nice bow out of it. Up and down, vertical as can be, just as straight as can be, all the way until it hits this hook right there. Up and down where the bark runs. The bark is running as straight as probably above average of any bodark tree I've seen. So that means the bark in it will not be what you call snaky, or the grain won't be what you call snaky grain, because it runs really straight, just as straight as can be. All up and down until it comes to this knot, right? What we're trying to achieve here is getting down to past this bark, this whitewood that's called sapwood. All of that's got to come off till you get down to that first growth ring. And that's what we're about to start doing on this little stave here. So the center of that is the heartwood, which is the yellow wood. And that's the strongest part. And your beetles, the reason we're taking the bark and the sapwood off right now is to prevent the beetles and the borers from getting in there. Because eventually, as that wood starts to cure out and get drier and drier, those beetles will try to find their way down into that heartwood, and they'll go down in there so far they'll come back out. But in the process of doing that, you'll have to go deeper and deeper to get out of that. We have a whole society today that actually are searching for an answer to who they are. And I could get back again about identity. And, you got to get old to be able, like I said, to understand some things in life itself. We'll put this in a vise and we're going to start taking that off. Now, you can use this draw knife two ways. And the way I use it is this way, backwards. You got a little bit more control over it by using it this way, and you won't be not apt to make as many mistakes by using it this way. And you can turn it over and use it this way, where a lot of people think that's the way you use it, but if you're making a bow or ball sticks, you need to be able to have as much control over the tool as possible. So in those days, they used stone tools.
Right.
Back then. Now, a draw knife is really, the principle is not new. We were using what you'd call a draw stone to scrape with. After you got all the bulk down and got down to that growth ring, we'd use pieces of flint. And sometimes something that's hard enough to scrape with, as you get into the finer part of finishing out the bow, you use a finer and finer tool to scrape it with. And my grandpa, when he was finishing up my first bow he made for me, he used broken glass. A lot of broken glass laying there. And he just scraped and made a lot of shavings that way. And that's the way I remember him making my bow, was scraping it. Spending a lot of time just scraping it after he got all the bulk removed. But he used a hatchet and a draw knife to do that. See how that's bleeding through the sap in it already. You can get most of it off there, but it's not necessary to get all of the sapwood completely off, but you want to get the majority of it off, because if you leave sapwood on it exposed, it'll check plumb down to your heartwood. Sapwood will check all the way down to your heartwood. Down to that, see, I'm almost there on that first growth ring. In fact, I probably am, but you can actually hear the difference
and it's sort of a scraping noise whenever you get close to that heartwood. Hear that? You kind of develop a feel from your seeing and hearing and the feel of it. And really, that's how people are. Wood's a lot like people. You'd be surprised. You talk about this thinking about people are different.
Everybody's different.
Bodark is a different species, is different.
It sure is.
Even Bodark's different from one to the next, you know. See, that's your winter, that little old white area there.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually where the tree grew, the thicker, darker. Then you got a lighter one. And that's how you determine the years of the tree. There's one, there's two, and get a thicker one there. And actually you can see what kind of history the years provided in moisture for that tree to grow. If it's got a thicker growth ring in it, that might mean a wetter year.
Mm-hmm.
The center one may have been a lean year, you know, or maybe little or no rain.
So
I'm getting down and see those growth rings are so thin, and a thin growth ring stave will teach you a lot of things because you can't mess up on it. If you do, you'll wound up having to go down to the next growth ring over and over if you're not, I call it, careful and have the method about doing it. Method is really important. You got to have a method, and you can't get in a hurry with this. No hurry at all. See, some of that there coming off is sapwood, and it's getting down to that yellow wood, which is the heart.
you gotta work the wood.
Yes, sir. The wood's the boss. You might be the maker, but the wood, you can't make that wood do anything that it wasn't. Like you might have a creek down there, a hard place to work, but you can work around that part of it. But usually, the wood will dictate to you. To me, it's like a path. It's like a road map almost about bow making. It points you in a direction about life itself. And there's a lot of things you learn along the way. And what you see here on this tabletop is probably going to do most of the work in roughing this stave out right here. The staves we were working on the last time were green, and it doesn't take as much effort to work on green wood because you still got the moisture left in the wood to do that with. And what we were doing then was debarking and taking the sapwood off. And it takes some effort to do that, but whenever you get into working on a cured out stave that's possibly a 1, 2, or 3, maybe older piece of wood, that's where the work starts. And from this point on, there's no shortcuts. You don't make any shortcuts on this. And as you get into moving on into shaping the bow, you can't get in a hurry on it. You take a little bit more time. Your movements are a little bit more deliberate, and by this time you have a method already established on what your goals are. So what we're going to do today is start on a cured out stave and get it down to the one growth ring. Bodark is tough, and the one of the few bow woods that they say it's got that heartwood in it. It's got that yellow wood in it, and that's the part you make the bow out of. But you know, it takes the people also that have a heart. They have the ability to survive, the ability to rebound, the ability that has that resilience to spring back no matter what the situation is. I'm saying about being real careful, diligent, and paying attention what that wood looks like, what it's saying to you, what it's conveying to you in the way it looks and how it's acting. Wood will behave differently, and the color will change. And to me, that's where you start to putting all this together and learning. When you were saying, how do you tell the bottom from the top limb? Well, there's a way of knowing and seeing and understanding how nature created this tree and how it grows up, And that's the transition of the color of the sapwood blending in with this heartwood. What you got to do that for? To be able to determine where the straightness of the stave is and how much wood you got on both sides of that line to play with. You're saying, well, why don't you just move your line way down here on this end, like this? Well, if you do that, you can see what the line allows you, and you're going to be bringing that line over that way if I move this line further to this side of it. So that's going to take away the however much wood you got on that side. And that's the problem we're going to wound up with is the wood on this side. See? So, okay. But sometimes your limbs, if you make one that way and you make your limbs and they come out this way, your string will be running off one side real bad, and your arrows probably wouldn't shoot accurately because the string will be way over here as you would be pulling it off here, and you're grabbing the handle here, and your arrow will probably want to pull off to the side. If you look down it and envision the dark lines, of course, obviously, or inside there is what you're both going to look like. Man, that thing is flat. And I think what I'm going to do with this is try to eliminate, but you got quite a bit to eliminate there, right in here. So I'll probably use the little hatchet to get rid of most of that. Okay, when you're using a hatchet to do this, there's a certain point you need to stop, because if you get too close, you're going to end up doing this right here. And that's what happened right there. Don't get too close to that line, because you need to get so far, and then you can go ahead and go with your draw knife to take care of the rest of it. Because see, that's what happened when I got too close to that line with a hatchet. But I think I can take that out of there and dressing it down at a later point. On a day like today, you got an overcast day, and most generally, when I get to this point, you want to be able to utilize all the natural sunlight as you possibly can. And the reason for that is when you get to removing the wood and you get closer to that line, you want to be able to see where your line is at. So the reflection off that stave is going to not, I'm going to say not be detrimental to your eyesight, but you get used to looking at that, you'll be able to tell where you're at quickly. But if you try to do it on the other side where there's a shadow, always use the sun as your direct reflection as the sun shines down on that stave. And that's what I do. I try to use the sun as much as I can, because it's real important that you see what you're doing at all times.
You also got to pay attention to the grain, how the grain runs on that, because if it, say, runs up this way and then back down again, you may be pulling out too much, and that grain may run back into the side of that where your lines are. Notice I've sort of slowed down a little bit on how much to take off, because I'm getting closer to the line, see? So you sort of lighten up a little bit when you get closer. Also, what I was just doing, you're going to get splinters in your hands. If you could get used to working with gloves on, that's fine. At a later point, also, you might think about using a respirator, because as we get into the next step, after this is rasping. With that rasp, you're going to have a lot of that dust flying up. So if you got a handkerchief, wet it. That way it'll absorb the dust and everything on the dampness of the handkerchief, or you can use a respirator. See how that came off?
But still yet, the bow remained an important part of our culture, even up till removal. After removal, that was in 1824 on the upwards to late 1830s, and some of that knowledge, even though they lost a lot of people along the way, still yet there was a lot of knowledge there about making bow that came with us, and about the arrow making. We've always, at one point in time in our life, maintained that connection, which is very important to us as Tajati people, because if you lose that connection or that identity of who you are, then you became just like, I'm not saying like everyone else, but it's almost systematic to where it's planned that you become one people. And if you're not careful, I'm not saying you should be different in any way, because you are part of the system and you are a part of this, what they call the melting pot. But don't ever forget your identity. Always remember who you are.
Get closer even when the layout is. See, underneath here is going to be some checking lines close to that line. So, yeah, you have to be real careful because you're real close to the line. There's even a check running right here. Looks like it's about 1/16 away from the line. So, yeah, as you move along, like I said on this, it gets a little bit more critical as you go along. So you got to be careful what you're doing. You can't put that wood back on there. Once you make a mistake, it's done. Okay, we've eliminated a considerable amount of wood on both sides of the back of the bow, as you can see. Now we're going to go to the belly and remove quite a bit. So what I want to do, I usually mark these lines here for a reference point. What I mean by that is that if I want this handle and the thickness to be, say, so thick, right there, say, that's where I want to be. And I may not know if I don't mark my lines here, if I'll be up here or down here. It's just a center reference to let me know where I'm at when I remove that belly wood. Okay. Belly wood, whenever difference is that on the back of the bow you have to maintain that one growth ring, because that's where all your pressure is, on the back of that bow. If you go through, like I said before, you create a weak area and it probably will break or blow up at some time or another. On the belly, this part will look comparable to what this looks like after I get all the belly wood off. And you're going through several growth rings to maintain a tapering. So you got interrupted growth rings that you have cut through when you do that tailoring process. But being that it's compressed, it's
not stressed.
Right. It's not stressed on the back. It's compressed. But if I strung it this way, buddy, watch out, it'll break. Some cured out boat arc is harder than others are. If you've got a lot of bulk to remove on the belly, go to the hatchet. Using a hatchet is a little more risky. Well, you need to be a little more safe to yourself, and you can chop out too much wood, like I said before. Just make sure you don't get too carried away with it. Once you get to a point to where you need to stop, go ahead and stop there and go to the draw knife again.
So it's probably a better idea for a novice
Yeah.
to try to avoid using the hatchet.
To avoid using it as much as possible. The more experience you get, you'll get your nerve to try to hatchet.
Also want to bring up another point. You've always heard the old term, on a profile of a person, you got a good side and a bad side. Bows are the same way. You got one limb, and it's because of the way it grew from the trunk up. The trunk side's usually the straighter side because it's stronger, and it grows up. It'll try to snake a little bit, but one limb is always, you always have one real, almost perfect in grain, where the other limb will be something wrong with it. So that's the good side and the bad side. It pulls out of you the ability to put forth your best work in something that you want your people to be proud of. And certain woods demand of you certain patience. And it's just like people again. With certain people, you have to have certain patience with. And wood is the same way. Certain woods and bodark, even though it is bodark, certain trees are hard to work. There's certain grains in that wood that go differently. Even though it's called bodark, there's a grain of some trees that goes real straight and some that go real crooked. And the ones that grow real crooked are the ones that you have to take more time and be more patient with. And it's just like people. We're not all alike. And some people, it demands of you that you be a little more patient with. And, be more considerate of. Be more forgiving of. And it teaches you to be a better person in the long run. Bow making, there's so many aspects of bow making. If you could just put it in a book, chapter by chapter, about the underlying reasons, not just by whittling away wood, or not just by simply making a bow, but all the other aspects that go along with it, teaching you about that pathway of life that you go through, about each little bit of piece you remove. Be careful as you pursue that. As you go through life itself, you have to be careful sometimes about how you walk through life. What is your path? What is your conduct in life? Well, it's roughed in. No tillering yet, but it's roughed in. As that artist starts to paint on that canvas, they bring out and they create a beauty there. And actually, a bow maker is the same way. Like I said before, this limb here has got to jump up on this limb. In other words, what I mean by that, I've gone down to the lines, rasped them down on the sides. This side, you can see the lines here. I need to do that before I get to the belly part on this side of it. This is the back and this is the belly. So right now what I want to achieve, getting the sides, then I'll flip it, and then I'll start tailoring the belly side of it. Right now, we're going to remove this excess from the outside of the lines and see what we can achieve. if you can see that, some of the pencil mark is barely there, all the way down to the end, and that's what you want to achieve right there. So what I've done is tillered one limb down, and if you can see this limb's thicker, I left this in here half. In other words, half the bow is rough tillered, and I'm taking it down to the lines, which are right here. This side is completely unfinished. I've cut a knock in that end right there, and all I need to do now is to make this limb match this limb here. I've got the tillering down on this limb here that I've rough tillered, and I've tested it to get it to that point to where I feel like I need it to be. Then I stopped right before the point it needed to be. And if you can see that, the way that limb is bending, if there's anything in the wood like like if you run into what I call snaky grain that comes in this area here, you can actually hear that tick in there. And what happens is that splinter on that side, that bow is not going to hold up. And I haven't encountered
Is it that same sound that you get when you're crunching through the rings?
It's a completely different sound.
Is it different?
It's a little click.
Okay.
It's a little click, real crisp click.
When you hear that, you need to stop.
You need to stop and say, well,
Yeah, it's scrapped.
it's going, yeah. And when I call this ground, when I take it to the ground this way and bend that limb, you can most generally tell also after you've bent that and stretched that limb out. See, this limb here is still real straight, and that limb there, obviously because you don't have the wood in it that this limb here has, it started to bend just a little bit. See that? You can see a little bit of a bend in that. And most generally, some bows, and that's why I like to pay attention to the growth rings in it. This bow here has got some pretty thick growth rings in it, and it may not, after you put a string on it, you get this limb looking like this limb. Knock it, tiller it down, make a string it up, pull it a little bit, get them fibers loosened up, then take the string off and look at it again. It's something you have to really do at each step in the process as you get into making a bow, that you have to check and check and check and recheck your bow and see what it's doing. If this limb here was starting to take a real drastically radical bend in it, I'd probably stop at that point.
You're talking about the little twist that we're seeing.
It gets what they call a term they call following a string or taking a set. I'm not saying days like this possibly could affect the fibers in the wood because of moisture. It could, but bow art's tough, and if you've got a good bow like that bow over there, and if you look at this bow here, it's still pretty straight. After all the stringing and I've shot it and yanking and pulling on it, it's still pretty straight. And relatively, if those limbs don't start to droop real bad on it, the bow's gonna hold up pretty good after a lot of shooting. So I'll check through each step, like I said before previously. I'll check it and look at it. and see what it looks like. But you're not going to really know up to this point what you got until you put a string on it, you get your tailoring done, and do your final tailoring, build your string it up, and see how those limbs bend. Ideally, what you want is both limbs will arc after it's strung, and they will look even. This limb will look just like that limb after you get them strung up and after you get it tailored. That's ideally. All the bows I've done, no matter how hard you try to stay on that straight line, there's going to be some little of this in there. But that comes from doing it by hand. You're going to make a little bit, take off a little bit more than you should, and that's what I'm saying. It's not about how fast you make a bow, but just develop a method when you do this. It never amazes me, and it's a point that I think that a lot of us miss. You can be a bow maker and miss the point. Why are you doing this, you know, and the reasons behind it. But there's a lot of thought that goes behind this, but this doesn't come in a day or a week or a month and a year, and I think that's the way it was back then. Okay, I said before, about 2.5 months to make my first bow. Ideally, with experience, a bow maker that's made some bows should be able to make a bow normally in 2 weeks' time, starting out from the stave. All right, let's go back about 400 or 500 years ago and think about, put it in that context about how long did it take them to make a bow. No one knows that. But see, our people done things in groups. So you had some that cut the tree, some that looked for the tree. You had your elders that were bow makers who had reached that height and knew what they were doing, that taught the young ones to do this. So you had different bows, I believe, in my opinion, at different stages. So if some worked on a bow and done a roughing, and as it got more critical to finishing a bow out, they'd take the more experienced ones to do that part of it. Okay, you had almost like a workshop in different groups that done different things. They might have been working on 5 or 6 or even more bows at one time. So what I'm saying, what will take one man to do one bow in 2 weeks, if he is what I call accomplished, it may took them possibly 2 or 3 days, in my opinion, because you had all these bows in different stages, and they were being put out on like assembly line, and were being finished. We'll go ahead and in the final stages of trying to get these limbs within the lines, just right on the line. So when you use this rasp, make sure you try to stay pretty flat and don't cock it up or down this way. Stay real flat. Put pressure here and here on your handle, of course, and try to stay on a flat line and do this. Okay, I think we got the lines there. what you do is you stop almost at the point you feel like where it's bending to where if I wanted to make like a 50-pound bow, say you stopped within 5 pounds. In other words, if you want to use figures at 55 pounds, that's just a figure. Make it a little bit stiffer than what you need it to be, because in a process, what you're going to be doing, if you get it in the final tailoring, you're going to be taking a little bit more off. And so, what I mean by tailoring is that you eliminate the thickness and taper it down to the tip of that knock and the width of it. And if you can see that right here, it's thicker up here in the handle, and as it goes on down, it gets thinner and thinner. So what it's doing is reducing the strength of the limb to this point, right in here, because this is the area that should be really bending. It's going to bend to a point up to this area up here, but this area in here is going to be taking all of the pressure on the back and compression on the belly. So you have to be really, really careful in how you remove wood in this area. But we'll get into that here pretty quick like. There's two types of rasp I use. This is a real fine rasp I use when I'm doing some finishing, and this is a real coarse rasp right here. I don't use. I've seen guys come up with these horse rasp, and I wouldn't use one. A horse rasp will do nothing but put deep, very deep gouges in a piece of wood, and what you wound up doing is creating a lot of work by scraping out these deep rasping marks created by a horse rasp. This isn't as aggressive, or it is aggressive, but it don't have the deep, real deep pieces of metal that take off the wood like a horse rasp does. And I will not use a horse rasp, but I'll go to this one here when I'm doing quite a bit of roughing until I get to that point of getting close, and then I'll go ahead and take it down and use the fine rasp.
So Mike, you're working on the belly.
The belly side.
With the rasp has never touched the back.
Never.
That's just been totally
never.
from the draw knife.
When you finish the back side and getting it down to that growth ring from end to end, you never come back and touch that until final sanding or scraping. And then you do it very minimal at that point. Yeah, right. You do not use a rasp on the back of the bow. You do not touch that. It's done. All except for the final sanding or scraping of the back of the bow, getting out some areas that what you're doing is finishing out that back of the bow. Okay, what I'm doing here is pretty much the same principle as whenever you're doing the back of the bow. I go in little steps, like you see me rasping off this portion here, paying attention to how much and how thin that gets. Okay, and that's a tailoring process. You eliminate the bulk on the sides and on the belly part to maintain that tailoring. And what you wound up is after you get it, checking it from time to time, and I will check this after I get down to the tip and seeing how that's going to bend. Right now, this is the other end I've already completed. Okay, see how it's moving pretty freely, pretty easily. Bending into it with pressure. All right. This side here is the untillered side. It's just rough tillered. See that? You got a lot of stiffness from this point all the way down to that area. Real stiff. In fact, it will not bend. It's kind of wanting to bend a little bit in the handle because it needs more wood in the tillering process removed from that belly. Okay, let's see what it'll do now. See if it'll bend. Still pretty stiff in this area here because the way it's looking, you got more wood in this area. It looks like from here and probably all the way to the end still yet. What I'll do, I don't have to at this point, but as I get closer to getting it tillering and removing more wood, and it starts to flex and bend like I expect it to, then I'll take it and check the one that I've already done, see how it bends. Then I'll flip it, the one at the end that I'm working on. I check at this point the limb that's finished, almost at that point. And this limb is still quite a bit thinner in here versus that. See that how thick that is right there? This is quite a bit thinner as it tapers on down. So what I'm going to do is come back up here and remove some more of this wood gradually as I go down towards the tip. And really you'll come out with both thicknesses on both limbs almost identical to the same thickness, almost. They're not going to be just alike in thickness, but you have to look at it and have to see where the thickest parts are at. And being that this limb's already there or almost there, you sort of compare. Then you sort of say, well, this limb here's got a little off here, so I need to take off a little here. Or this right in here is pretty thin, take off more in here. It seemed just a little bit stiffer. But see what happens when you get them this close. You can go a little bit too far and get it bending too much. I'm going to do some final rasping, and that possibly may bring it in close to this the way this limb's bending. But on this, where you're almost there on the what I call ground tillering stage. I'll go back to the fine grass and remove the rough areas that I created with the rough fracs. Pretty doggone close. I'm going to say this is the bottom limb for some reason. It's a little bit thicker and a little stiffer. It's a little bit thicker in this area right here. Right there. I'm going to cut the nocks next and make it, this here knock design is pretty much a style that was pretty popular with a lot of your bows out of the southeast, from a lot of your pictures and museums. Your bows have got this, I call it a diamond design, diamond tip design. Pretty much your Mvskoke people use the same knock design. Your Cherokees use the same knock design. I've seen them as far upwards northeast all the way up into Vermont and that area with the same knock design, and that's kind of interesting to me, how that evolved and how far up the same design of knock is. Today I think I'm going to split the difference and go with 3/4 from the end there. So I'm going to cut these nocks in with a chainsaw file. Sometimes I'll take a lot of time in doing this. Okay. But right now, at this stage, this knock is roughed in. This knock on this end is pretty much been finished out almost, and it's pretty defined. I've done some sanding on it, light sanding, to take the string. You want to knock off with this chainsaw file all the rough corners, because that's going to be hard on that string after you get this bow strung. So I'm knocking down the corners of that so it won't put any nicks in the string. This bow here is recurved one limb. I done that about a week ago. I left this one undone. And what we're going to do today is recurve this limb. So this limb's done right here. I marked a spot right here. Probably in older days, most boat art, after you get it down to the stage it's in now, you'll have one limb or the other that's twisted. Sometimes you're twisting in a boat arc, a stave, or at this stage roughed out, won't hurt if it's not real bad, and you'll have to use your own judgment on that, because usually after you get tillered and strung, the twist will usually come out. But if it's really bad now, you're going to have to straighten that out. So
back in the old days, I think they used direct heat. They probably oiled it down real heavy with bear grease, some grease. They used a lot of hickory oil too back then and back in the southeast. And they might even use some hickory oil on it. But they greased it down real heavily, the area that they wanted to straighten or recurve, and they put it over a fire, open fire, and turned it and not to burn it. You have to really be careful. But as that wood warms up, the fibers loosen up in it, and the grain loosens up in it. So you get it at the point of where you can't touch it with your hand. And the way we're going to do it today is with steam, water, hot steam. And usually they don't take very long to do that. Back then, I'm thinking they probably used clamps of some type to hold that together, possibly to tie here. And as they were twisting that or turning that, they might possibly be using a clamp here of some type made out of 2 pieces of wood or bone, maybe tied with rawhide to twist that. Or they might be possibly had a little tree or had a small limb that had a fork in it that they would hold in there and bend it close to the fire where they were. Because see, after this gets hot and where you can't touch it without burning it, then you have to immediately start straightening it. And the way I do that is I will get it to the point where it's ready to say recurve. Then I'll stick it in a vise or a clamp and bend that. And then I'll usually bend it and hold it there. And you have to be sure you don't overbend. What I'm gonna do is we're getting pretty close to that water is gonna be boiling. I'll lay this portion down next to the water that's boiling. I don't lay the backside down on it because that's where your growth rings are pretty solid, not growth rings, but that got that one layer on the backside, and the belly side is where your grain is going to be opened up, and it's going to take the heat and the moisture quicker because it's opened up on the belly side. So this area or this belly side is what I lay down facing the steam. The whole surface will get heated up with the steam, but this area here will take the moisture or the heat and steam quicker. And that's the area I'm going to lay down. And I'm going to cover it with a piece of tin foil, and we'll wait till it gets to that point. I made a mark right here. Is the area I want to recurve. I made one on this end of it here, and I'll mark both ends to make sure I know where I'm at, where I won't get the curve going back too far into the limb. So you got this mark here. This has already been recurved, heated, steamed, and recurved. So that's what it looks like right there. Okay. I usually hold this at about a 200 count, and most generally, all the time, it's 200 is enough. But you have to hold it in this position till it sets, and it's cooling down all the time.
in that 200 count. About how they straighten those back, 300, 400, 500 years ago. And I think they used direct heat over fire, oil them up. I got some bear grease in there too, so I'm going to show it to you. They oiled it up real heavily, and it had a roughed out stage, and warmed it up over fire, not to burn one, but got to where they could see it sort of sizzle a little bit, and they couldn't touch it, and we'll open the fibers up through the heat, direct heat. That process is still used today by some bow makers. They still use direct heat to recurve or straighten limbs out. But to me, I think steam pays it a little bit more respect by steaming it, and it seems to you have to wait for it to release some moisture in it. At this stage, after you straighten one with steam, you have to wait probably a week before you can get back to it to finish it out. But when they done it with direct heat, they might go ahead and be ready to work on one maybe after an hour or so. It'd be quicker with direct heat. But you risk you put the risk in there of maybe fracturing the fibers in it by direct heat. That's why I prefer steam to do it with. It's a longer process of being able to get back to it after it's released all the moisture out of it after you steam it. But I think it's a lot safer. I have seen limbs that you could tell that they use direct heat because it will be a little bit darker and burnt. If you apply a little bit of heat to bow dart, it'll turn dark. Heat does that to it. Now, this limb here will appear to be a little bit more bent. I can see that in this limb, but that limb will want to, what they call, it's got memory, will want to go back just a little bit. But the fibers have already been heated and stressed and bent. It'll want to go back a little bit, but it should turn out just like this limb here. That's what you call a recurve. Get it out here. That there is a rawhide strength, and of course it's pretty stiff. It's been waxed pretty heavily, but if you can notice the twist in it, you can actually see the twist in it. But when I cut the rawhide, there was 2 strands of rawhide in there, about 1/4 of an inch wide. And you want to cut the strip up and down. If you cut it up and down is the longest length anyway of the deer, from head to tail. So that portion there is what you need to cut out to make a string out. And to make a loop on both ends, you have to allow for the loop. So you add 14 inches more to the length of the bow itself. Got a lot of holes. This here used to be an old quilting frame, belonged to my grandma, but it came in handy for this. I've been using it a lot. Get the show on the road. Let's see. Where am I? 1, 2, 3. This is 4.
Going back to 6.
Okay. You got 2 bundles here. You'll have to cut both ends, but we're going to do one end at a time.
Okay.
It's heavily waxed, so it usually stays together pretty good. Snip it, then you start twisting it. 2 bundles, you got 2 separate bundles here, because I've cut the 2. the continuous wrap. So you'll have 2 bundles. Okay. Make sure you hold that and don't lose your 7-inch length. Okay, you twist it. If you're right-handed, I twist mine to the right. If you're left-handed, obviously you're going to go to the left. And sometimes if you're left-handed, you may go to the right. But if you go in one direction, this way, loop it over. That strand, twist it to the right, but you go backwards over the other side, see. And it's just repetitious. See how that's coming out right there? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, we have to determine which end of this, the limbs are the bottom and the top. All right, I want to make a string, the loop for the top limb first. Oh, that's the bottom. This is the top. Okay. Okay, this would be the top. The top limb. So at this point I stop and I go around, but the top limb is where your string has to be strung for the top limb. The bottom string will stay on that bottom limb all the time. So you'll have to make it big enough where it'll slide down. So that makes the loop bigger. Okay. Making that bigger. And that string will stretch some. I'm gonna put a couple of more twists in it. I think that's close. Okay, now you take that, you have measured that to make sure that it's big enough to slide down. As it gets bigger, that loop has to be bigger. Okay, I'm gonna put another one in there. Now we're going to make that loop come down over itself and achieve that continuous loop. So it's kind of a awkward situation here, but hold that in place and place those 2 bundles over themselves again, and then you got 4 bundles. And obviously you got a bigger, if you want to use a term, you're not braiding it, you're plaiting it. Okay, to do the other end, you just repeat the process. That's all that it rounds up to be. You snip that. Flip the bow over. You're making a loop for this end.
Make sure you don't have to answer the phone or anything right now.
Yeah, there you go. And repeat the process. I want to make this string here where it will be fairly snug around this knock in, because it's not going to be slipping off down. This end stays on that end of the knock. The other end, you have to slide it up and down when you're stringing the bow. Okay. everything has its set order when you do this. And we're getting close to putting that knot in the string. Okay. This is the test right here. Yep.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Not bad. Not bad.
Now, shooting one of these things is different than shooting a compound. Recurve is pretty close if you do what they call snap shooting, instinctive shooting. When I pull back, I'll pull up from the ground and then look at my target at the same time. And when I reach that point of release, it's almost like mine says let go and let it rip. But I'll kind of stand with my feet apart like this, comfortably. Don't try to stand like this. That's too awkward. Get out of the way. Go on. I want to get air in you. Okay. But I'll stand like so. And when I pull, I'll have my air on my bow cannon just a little bit. And when I get up there, well, I'll let her go. Okay.
Perfect.
But Grandpa really made my first bow. And I'll always remember that. And I got fond memories of that. But I guess why a person kind of gets away from the culture in your Indian way is that in your youth, there's a lot of things that kind of pull you away from your culture, and you're too busy trying to study and go to school. And there's other things and activities that takes that place. But today it's kind of a dying out skill with our people, but we're trying to bring this back and hopefully in the future be able to teach and hopefully I'll teach my grandchildren to do this. And I could just about almost go to that area today and look at that same tree, it's still there, and see him climbing that tree and cutting a limb out of it. And to me, that's really unique to me because that's what I do now. I'm following his footsteps. Is what we call in a Mvskoke language, you call it Cvkotakse Hayv, and that means bow maker.